Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Frayne Olson analyzes corn and wheat markets. Charles Shapiro discusses spring soil sampling. We hear why Argentina's farmers benefit from proximity to their nearest shipping port. And George Graff talks about his soybean research work in Chile. North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our marketing analyst this week. We talked with Frayne Tuesday afternoon about the current condition of U.S. winter wheat, upcoming reports on grain stocks and planting acres, and the situation between Ukraine and Russia. Residents in Crimea voted days ago to break away from Ukraine and allow Russia to annex their peninsula. Since the region is a grower and exporter of wheat and corn, we started our discussion with Frayne by asking what impact this could have in those two markets.
Short term, it has some impacts, but longer term, it can also have some impacts on both the wheat market as well as the corn market. Because Ukraine is obviously a major exporter for wheat, we've talked about that before, as well as Russia. But the last several years, Ukraine has also been a major exporter of corn and a competitor for us in the world corn market. So both the corn market as well as the wheat market's taking a look at this and trying to pay attention to it. Short term, there hasn't seemed to be any major interruptions. Crimea, which has a naval base on it, also has some export facilities, but they're not the core exporting region or the export facilities for the Ukraine. That's located in another part of their coastal region. So short term, the shipments, the grain has already been sold, already been booked. Those shipments have been pretty much on time, so the people that have ordered it already have been getting their shipments, which was kind of the first concern. But it looks a little bit longer term now that the major buyers are a bit concerned about buying additional wheat or corn from that region. So the current discussion is that Ukraine isn't selling a lot of new corn or new wheat sales at this point. Obviously, with the tensions starting to escalate now, there's some concerns what's going to happen to some of the Russian wheat exports as well. So, it's a developing story. It's something we're going to have to pay attention to. One of the other issues that's coming up in the Ukraine is, given the uncertainty and the problems that may occur economically within the country, are the farmers in that region going to be able to get financing to put the crop in? And again, we don't know the answer to all of that. We're trying to follow it and pay close attention.
Let's come back home, and what do you believe is the current situation for the U.S. winter wheat crop?
Yeah, that's the other major thing that the wheat market's concerned about or looking at right now is the winter wheat conditions. The short term, the real issue we're arguing about or trying to figure out is how many of the acres that were planted last year will actually break dormancy and be able to move into vegetative state so we can start getting a yield read on it. Last year we had a very high abandonment rate. There was a lot of the winter wheat that got seeded that either did not come out of the ground or got ripped up later on for crop insurance. And that was a little bit of a surprise to the wheat market, the level of abandonment we got last year. It's also a concern this year. It is something we're trying to pay attention to. Both domestically as well as internationally, our carryover stocks of wheat are getting a little bit on the tight side. It's not to a danger zone yet, but we're on the low end of comfortable. And so it is something that the wheat market's paying quite a bit of attention to because we do need a good wheat crop again this year.
At the very end of the month, on the 31st, we'll get 2 reports from the USDA. One will be on prospective planting acres for the spring, and the other will be on grain stocks. Do you have expectations going into those 2 big reports?
Yeah, everybody, I want them to circle the March 31st on their calendar because that's going to be a very important day. The market really is focused primarily on the planting intentions report, the first survey-based read on what farmers intend to plant next year. Everybody knows they'll probably adjust those planting intentions as we move through the spring's work, but it's our first real read on what we think farmers are going to do. And of course, the division or the balance of acres between corn, soybeans, and wheat are going to be very, very important. I think right now the expectation is that corn acres are going to be down, soybean acres will be up, wheat acres will be probably stable, very similar to what we saw last year. Again, the big argument is how much will corn be down and how much will soybeans be up. The other thing the other report we're going to get will be the quarterly stocks report, which will be important particularly for corn because that's one of the reports we use to get a gauge or a feel on how quickly we're using up the corn crop in the feed sector, livestock sector. It's very difficult to track those numbers, and the quarterly stocks report is what we use as a benchmark.
I know one of the things you're also looking at, Frayne, is that Hogs and Pigs report, the quarterly one coming out the Friday before those 2 big reports to see how much corn could actually be used by what's left of a hog supply.
And that is an issue, obviously not just for the hog sector or the pork sector, but also for feed from the corn side. As the PED virus becomes a bigger issue, as the herd size starts to contract, the question is how much corn are we actually going to be using within the pork sector? And that's one of the things we use to get a read on what those numbers should be.
Next week, Mike Briggs will look at cattle markets, and John Moret from J.E. Moret Grain Company will analyze corn and soybean markets ahead of the USDA's reports on grain stocks and prospective planting acres. Related to the pork industry, Senators Kay Hagan and Debbie Stabenow have asked Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack to approve disaster assistance for hog farmers affected by the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. Stabenow from Michigan is the chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee, and Hagan represents North Carolina, one of the country's largest pork producers. The senators say PEDV has killed more than 4 million pigs in the U.S. since April 2013. The virus continues to fuel hog prices. In last week's episode, we told you farrow to finish margins for pig farmers were the highest since 1987. This week's Sterling Pork Profit Tracker puts the return at $84.70 per head. That's the highest in the tracker's history. The price of fresh retail beef climbed more than 20 cents from the first to second month of 2014, averaging $5.28 per pound in February. The average price in January was $5.04 a pound. The February cost is the highest on USDA record, which began in July of 1987. The retail value for pork fell 3 cents in February to average $3.73 per pound. With spring beginning this week and the ground temperatures starting to warm up, we talked with Charles Shapiro Thursday afternoon to discuss soil sampling as farmers look ahead to spring planting. Give me an update on what it's been like in your area of northeast Nebraska so far this winter.
It's been dry, one word. Not a lot of snow. It's been cold.
How much precipitation?
I don't know the exact number, but I don't think we've had an inch.
So for a number like that, if you sampled in the fall, which you have, how consistent could those numbers be coming into spring here?
The big problem with fall sampling could be with the nitrogen part of it. The phosphorus, potassium, organic matter, that's going to be pretty constant. So this past fall, with the way the winter went, we probably have pretty good confidence that what we sampled last fall is still there. If there are other parts of the state where they got more precipitation, there could be some problem, but it should be fairly good.
Now, what should you look for when you go out to either your sampling or the consultant is sampling? What do you want to look for within the profile, and how deep do you want to go?
Okay, well, we split the nutrients up pretty much nitrogen and everything else. And nitrogen, we like to see at least a 2-foot sample. We prefer a 3-foot sample. Some of the NRDs require just a 2-foot. Maybe some have more. The various phases that each individual one has would have different requirements. From an agronomic point of view, I like to take 0 to 8, 8 to 24 inches, and then if you have a strong back or a hydraulic probe, go to either 36 or 48.
Or a son, perhaps, who could do it for you, probably.
Yeah, there you go,
Yeah.
There you go.
What about phosphorus levels and things like that?
Now, Phosphorus, we really would like people to standardize on 0 to 8. And in the reduced tillage areas, people might say, you know, why should I sample 0 to 8? I put it on the surface, I don't till it, or now I'm disking to 4 inches. But most of our database is correlated with what's in an 8-inch sample. So if you want to split 0 to 4 and 4 to 8, just for your own interest, that'd be fine. But we really like that 0 to 8 number, because then we can say this is high, low, or medium.
The price of corn is obviously not what it used to be, but how does it compare to maybe what you're seeing in the price of fertilizer, for instance, if you're trying to weigh the cost analysis?
For the only nutrient that we really take price into account is nitrogen. And we compare it to the price of nitrogen, the price of corn. We call that the corn-N ratio. And right now it's running about 7, because corn has gone down actually relatively faster than nitrogen, but nitrogen is cheaper now than it was a year ago as well.
Do you see much when you look at soybeans? I mean, there's been more talk about maybe if you should be applying nitrogen to soybeans.
There's a lot of talk on that. My opinion is that I don't think we have a good database to recommend it on every field all the time.
Where can people go for more information if they're looking for it, Charles?
The cropwatch.unl.edu is great, or you can go to soilfertility.unl.edu. It both gets you to the same place.
And you have some EPUBs and things like that that are available?
Right. For this particular topic, soil testing, we have one EC on soil testing for precision ag, and then we have one that just goes through the general procedures.
You can check cropwatch.unl.edu for daily updates of soil temperature readings in your area of the state. Maps feature both 7-day averages and 7-day departures from normal. More detailed data for selected sites across the state will be added in April. While glyphosate-resistant Kochia was years ago confirmed in the U.S., UNL Extension cropping systems specialist Greg Kruger says Nebraska has only recently had to deal with it. Kruger started working with a resistant population in a greenhouse 2 years ago and confirmed its resistance last year. Kruger says it's becoming more concerning that glyphosate-resistant Kochia is popping up more in southwest Nebraska and in the Panhandle. He says the populations he's working with are showing strong levels of resistance compared to the recommended dose.
The labeled rate is 22 ounces, and generally speaking, we would expect a 100% control at that rate. And we do still see some populations in Nebraska that are still highly susceptible, and 22 ounces or oftentimes half of that even will completely control the population. We are seeing some plants that are surviving up to a gallon of glyphosate or Roundup greater than 128 ounces. In some cases 175, 180, or 200 ounces of Roundup or more. So it's very high in some cases.
Kruger says it's important growers know the answer to this problem isn't simply applying more glyphosate. He recommends producers use multiple modes of action, tank mixtures, and change their cropping systems when possible. Kruger says if there's a problematic field, a farmer might want to delay planting until after Kochia emerges and can be controlled. Now a quick look at one of Argentina's major agricultural shipping ports. Terminal 6, or T6, was founded in 1985 by 6 companies. Its 2 shareholders now are Bunge and Argentine company AGD. T6 sits on about 1,000 acres of river-adjacent land near the city of Rosario. That's a very important location, agriculturally speaking. This area is positioned well to serve the Pampas region of Argentina, a nearly 300,000 square mile area of plains where towards the east, soybeans flourish. It's situated so well that T6 says about 75 to 80% of all Argentine ag goods move through this port city. That means harvest is a very busy time. It's like a store queue for unloading soybeans. You arrive, get tested for quality, take the assigned spot for your number, and then wait. Maybe for 5 to 9 hours. This is mid-January, still months away from the onset of soybean harvest. But once that begins,
between March to June, it's very difficult to arrive here because there are a lot of trucks in the streets. But it's a good season for us, for our company.
During the peak of harvest, T6 might receive 1,300 trucks per day. That puts the unloading capacity at 40,000 tons each day from trucks, in addition to the 550 rail cars it can receive and the 7 to 9 barges it can unload. This gives the port a total unloading capacity of 80,000 tons per day. As we've noted in the past, crushing is a major business in Argentina. T6 holds a crushing plant on site. It says the plant handled 19% of Argentina's crushing production in 2013, making it the biggest in the country and one of the largest in South America. This port features 15 vertical silos, 49 tanks, and 15 warehouses, each with 60,000 ton capacity, and 2 of them with 200,000 ton capacity. Again, Argentina doesn't specialize in exporting whole soybeans. Only 10 to 12% of T6's exports are whole beans, but the country has controlled the markets for soybean oil and meal. It's led both Brazil and the U.S. in meal exports since 1997 and soybean oil shipments since 1995. And since farmers are responsible for the transportation costs, Bunge's Juan Ignacio Alonso says the farm's proximity to the river sets Argentine producers apart.
Be close to the ports is a really advantage for them because the margin of the soybeans are very good because the cost, in fact, of the transportation itself is very low. So the main advantage is for them, and it's an advantage of the Argentine farmer because it makes him more competitive compared to Brazil or even the United States.
Again, our full coverage from Argentina and Brazil can be found on our website at marketjournal.unl.edu/South America. Red cedar trees don't yet make up a forest in Nebraska, but the infestation continues to spread across the state. A feature article in the March Nebraska Farmer recommends the best options to manage this fast-growing tree that can choke out rangeland. UNL weed management specialist Stephen Knezevic emphasizes controlling the trees when they're young. Studies show control measures applied to trees less than 2 feet high were most successful. If managed early, the trees can more easily be cut by hand shearing, ATV shearing equipment, or mowing machinery. Other control measures include prescribed fires and the use of chemicals. You can read more about red cedar control in the March Nebraska Farmer. In the mid-1980s, the Nebraska Soybean Board provided UNL with $15,000 to begin a soybean breeding and genetic studies project. Last year, the Nebraska Soybean Board invested more than $230,000 in research for the project, which will soon mark its 31st year. Last year also saw the commercialization of 3 additional soybean lines from the breeding program and the completion of a major license agreement with Bayer Crop Science. That partnership will allow access to soybean breeding lines and populations from the program. George Graff, a UNL professor of agronomy and horticulture, has worked with the program for many years and recently showed a group of Nebraska growers and researchers around his soybean plots in the South American country of Chile. We recently talked with George about that trip and about his history of work between UNL and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
All of our work is related to soybean breeding and cultivar development. So our main objective is to develop, new soybean varieties that are going to enhance the production and profitability for soybean farmers in Nebraska.
How long have you been working with the board?
25 years. So they've been really good. I started here in 1988, and they gave us continuous support for the last 25 years to develop this soybean breeding and genetics program. So we've come a long way, and it's turned into a really nice program, I think.
Describe some of the work you're doing in Chile. You have research work going on down there.
Yeah, we have 2 nurseries we use in Chile, and so the advantage there is that we can use the South America nursery as an off-season nursery during our winter, and we get normal growth in the field and compared to Nebraska in the summer. So we can actually evaluate traits like yield and other things that we would be able to do in Nebraska as well. And the yield data we get correlates well with what we find in Nebraska. So we do things in our Chile nurseries like progeny row selections. Progeny rows would be the first time we get to look at a new soybean variety. We have about 10 or 12,000 progeny rows in Chile. And so we grow those and make selections out of those that can then come back and go into yield testing at multiple locations in Nebraska. We also can do some pretty specific yield test experiments with drip irrigation, because in the region we use in Chile, they get no rain during their summer, during November to April. So we can provide really specific water treatments. we can provide full irrigation and get that yield comparison, and then we can provide like a managed stress and induce stress at certain developmental stages, like full, beginning pod or later in seed fill. And so then we can get really good information on how the range of new varieties we're developing behaves to water stress, drought stress at different developmental stages. So the nursery is really useful for a lot of different things, including generation advance, really good yield data, and then those managed stress environments.
You recently sort of toured around a group of Nebraska producers and producers from the Nebraska Soybean Board as well. What did they find interesting, or what did they think maybe they saw that could be used in Nebraska or could help out, at least in production overall?
Well, they saw our plots, the drip study plots. They saw some of the new the populations that we have there from some new crosses, so they could see kind of the traits that are in there. There's they could see the plant growth. I think the plants were right about R4, so they were beginning to set some pods, and they could see the differences in our irrigation treatments, in those plots between the fully irrigated and the limited irrigation treatments in terms of plant height and
Sure.
some beginning pod set. So that part was interesting. They also learned about the agricultural system in Chile. In that region, all of the irrigation is dependent on snowmelt from the mountains, and there really is no rain during the season. So all the agriculture, the fruits and grapes and vegetables, and all the research, the agricultural research that goes on there is all dependent on 100% on snowmelt from the mountains. So that was another interesting component of that.
What's next for you? When do you go back, and what does the harvest look like down there?
Well, in Chile, they don't really grow soybeans commercially, so there's a lot of companies there doing research, using it for things like what we use it for. Harvest will start the end of this month, so I go again the 25th of March to collect data, make selections, and start harvest in the beginning of April. So the plants look really good. We're getting good response from the treatments. The populations look good, and the progeny row fields all look good. So there's been really good growth, and we're looking forward to a lot of good data.
Now, with his first full weekly forecast for spring, here's UNL Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Here we are again for the weekly forecast. Last week we talked about the potential for a couple systems to move through the state, one during the weekend and then one during the Tuesday-Wednesday time frame. That's exactly how the models forecast, and that's exactly how it played out. Unfortunately, the first system did not generate as much moisture as was predicted, but the second system generated a little bit more moisture in certain parts of the state, particularly if you were from western Custer County southwestward toward the McCook region, where we've seen snowfall totals ranging anywhere from 3 to upwards of 12 inches of moisture, or 12 inches of snowfall. As you moved east or west of the system, the snowfall totals dropped off rather dramatically, as that system was fairly stationary during the day before it started to pick up steam and move eastward during the late afternoon and overnight hours. So once you got into eastern Nebraska, precipitation totals dropped off to just basically trace amounts. But for the most part, almost all locations received anywhere from about a 5/100ths to about 2/10 of an inch outside of that narrow strip, where we've seen totals ranging from 1/4 upwards to an inch of moisture. So it was a welcome event for portions of the state. We certainly need to see more widespread precipitation events to alleviate some of these short-term dry conditions that have been persistent now for the better part of the last 2 or 3 months, particularly east of the Panhandle. So do we have the opportunity for weather or for precipitation in our forecast? Let's take a look at the upper mountains and see what this week brings to us. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is that we do have a troughing pattern trying to develop across the northern plains, and this is going to start sliding cool air toward the southwest as the day progresses, and then it will possibly start to generate some precipitation during the late afternoon, evening hours across the Panhandle region and possibly even the far western extent of the southwestern corner of the state. And that will continue as we go into tomorrow, as that moisture and energy moves straight south toward southeastern Colorado. There's the potential, according to the quantitative precipitation forecast, from anywhere from 1/10 of an inch to 1/4 inch of moisture to fall across the Panhandle. Most of that would be, unfortunately, in the form of snow. but as you head eastward, the precipitation total has dropped off significantly, and in fact in eastern Nebraska, I think we'll be fortunate if we receive a trace of precipitation. Now as we go into Monday, we're going to see another piece of energy trying to make its way southward, and this is going to even carve out much cooler air into our region. So probably as we get into Monday, northeast Nebraska will see its coldest day, with the opportunity for snowfall to start generating during the late afternoon hours and carrying on into Tuesday morning. And in fact, the quantitative precipitation forecast for eastern Nebraska from Monday through Tuesday indicates upwards of a 1/4 inch of moisture, but most locations should be right around 1/10 of an inch. Now as we get into Tuesday, that system moves rapidly toward the east, and we start to see the ridge building in over the central Rockies, bringing warmer conditions to western Nebraska, but unfortunately northeast Nebraska is still going to be on the very backside of this upper air trough and under the cold air aloft and at the surface pushing toward the southeast, and that should hold temperatures into the low 30s. Now as we get into Wednesday, we're going to start to see a zonal flow, so we're going to get downsloping winds across the western part of the state, and we may actually see temperatures moving up into the 50s, possibly even an isolated 60 in the southwest part of the state. Get further east, we're still going to be locked into a little bit of this cool air. That's going to knock about 10 to 15 degrees off the high temperatures. Now as we get into Thursday, we start to see a trough starting to take place in the central Rocky Mountains, and that will begin to swing into our region as we get into Friday. So we're going to see a boost in temperatures as winds revert back to the southwesterly direction. Temperatures should be well into the 60s across the southwest, and even making it up to the upper 40s to low 50s across the northeast. As we get into Friday, here comes this system. Right now, the models are generating some decent precipitation. They've been varying in terms of intensity of this system. One run is a very strong system, the next one's a little bit weaker. We're just going to have to pay attention, so keep an eye on the weather. This could change rather drastically. And as we go to the temperature forecast, coolest temperatures this weekend for the east, and then we'll see a slow moderation through the midweek period. And then we will see another system moving in on Friday to cool our conditions down. 8 to 14-day forecast reinforcing cold air remains in place through the early part of April. And in terms of precipitation, one of the most widespread precipitation maps that I've seen in the last couple of months.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Frayne Olson, Charles Shapiro, and George Graff, as well as our look at Argentina's ports, can be found on our website and through the Market Journal mobile app as part of the March 21st episode. Next week, Mike Briggs will look at cattle markets, and John Moret will analyze corn and soybean markets. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.